I think the dialogue consistently proves to bring a higher quality of conversation. It uncovers more hidden gems, but you're always balancing what the ideal is with making sure you can actually bring this work over the finish line.
Welcome back to Content Logistics. I'm your host, Baylee Gunnell. If you've ever tried to build content from your internal experts, you know the struggle is real. Different stakeholders, different comfort levels, and a lot of "I'm not a marketer" can slow everything to a crawl. Today, we're fixing that with a clear, repeatable process. I'm joined by Kristen Sweeney, who leads Every Little Word and specializes in expert-led content for complex industries. Kristen's team has turned countless SME conversations into publishable assets, and she's here to break down the exact steps from buy-in to approvals to capturing great raw material and closing the loop after publish. Let's get into it. So expert-led content programs tend to create a lot of complexity. There's usually multiple stakeholders, varying comfort levels, and a lot of non-marketers in the mix. So process is really important. So that's something we're going to be talking about today. Super excited to have you on the show today, Kristen. And just want to dive into chatting with you about this. In your opinion, maybe let's start with the baseline. What is expert-led content? How would you define that?
Yeah, thank you, Baylee. I'm super excited to be here. Being able to weave in the content operations piece of what we do and expert-led content in general is really exciting to me because I firmly believe operations and execution is the unsung hero of content. So expert-led content, just to back up a little bit, there was a time in our agency when if you asked us what we did, I would probably fumble around a little bit, honestly, and then I would say we do a lot of thought leadership. And that's true. But what I started to notice was there was a point where thought leadership, I felt I think it's starting to lose its meaning in the marketplace more broadly. And I also realized that I was using it as this weird catch-all term. And so I needed to go back and apply some rigor to how I'm thinking about thought leadership and how I'm thinking about this other stuff that I think we do. And so where I landed on that was the thing that really describes our approach best is expert-led content. And what that means is using the expertise inside your organization in order to create marketing and communications assets, campaigns, messaging that can be externalized. And in some ways that sounds really obvious, but I think that a lot of times it's not, right? Marketing is maybe over here trying to say what story do we want to tell, but it's not being connected directly back to the super smart people inside the organization, the people who are maybe working with clients, but who are not marketers and communicators by trade. That's what I think about as expert-led content, and it can take a lot of different shapes. Just real quick, the difference between that and thought leadership is a one aspect of expert-led content. But to me, thought leadership is one, it's authored by one person. So a person is a thought leader. That's how I think about that. So when you are posting on LinkedIn trying to build your own personal brand, you might be trying to become a thought leader. Experts can contribute to all sorts of content and they might not be quoted and things like that. Maybe they're providing more background knowledge. Maybe they're providing best practices rather than something that's a really new perspective. So there's some variability in there, but that's how we would define expert-led content. It's not one type of content asset. It's not one kind of campaign. It's really an approach to how you're going to create content across the organization. And the reason I think that's really important, especially for B2B organizations, is trust, right? It's the conversation we're all having right now is how do we build trust? How do we build credibility? How do we build authority? And we know those are the things that buyers are looking for in these spaces. And so what better way? Don't manufacture expertise, go and find it inside your company and then figure out how to bring it external.
Yeah, I think for people in marketing, this might make sense. A lot of the times we maybe don't have the expertise needed to communicate with these complex buying cycles or speak directly to maybe an engineer. I know that's something you had mentioned before, but
yeah,
when you're working at a company, you have those resources and those people that you can talk to within the company or maybe even externally getting expertise from other people as well. So, like I mentioned before, though, sometimes this can be really complicated to do. So, got to break down the operations of it. But what tends to be the biggest reason these programs tend to stall out before they even start?
Yeah. So the fanciest name, right, would be suddenly you're going cross functional. Like basically, you're working with a lot of people in other departments, and marketing and communications and being a content contributor probably doesn't appear in their job description. So not only are you needing to do a lot of education and get their buy in on why they should take time out to help you, how they can actually best help you, but you're competing with their own set of priorities and incentives. And frankly, like their calendar might not be perfectly aligned to your priorities, your timelines. So there is definitely complexity added. I think it's worth it in the end for companies that can figure it out, but they don't just need to invest in wanting to bring in experts and like broadly buy into this idea. They need to also invest in kind of the processes and the work that's involved to make this an actual machine. Because there's nothing more frustrating than you're trying to create one single content asset and 6 months later it's still just stuck in limbo because you're not sure who's supposed to review it, and oh, you couldn't get on someone's calendar, and that person suggested 3 other people you should talk to, and that sort of thing. It can quickly balloon out of control.
Yeah. I, especially when you have so many people that need to buy into it, the preparation I think is really important. So I want to talk through your process, maybe starting with that preparation, some of that buy-in, actually capturing the content, and then going on and creating blog posts or ebooks or whatever you're going to create from that. So let's start with your preparation. So like you mentioned, your success is really going to start before you probably even interview anyone. So what does your process look like? How do you prepare people to do this kind of content?
Yeah. So as an agency partner, we are always going to be working with some kind of in-house contact, hopefully someone that we like to call a content champion, right? Who's really going to be inside eyes for us. I would say success starts in the beginning with choosing the right people. That's a combination of factors. It can be things like, who do you want to make really visible? Who has great expertise in this area? But also things like, who do we think is going to talk to us and be open to this? If you get someone, we've certainly been stonewalled before by folks who just can't seem to find their way to prioritizing it. Placing your good bets to start with is really important. And then leaning a little bit on that content champion internally. And we often support with this. We can provide language or templates, but the first thing before we ever speak with an expert is securing their buy-in. Because otherwise, think about it, we're showing up in their email, we're asking for some amount of time. It's some initiative, they're not really sure what it is. So making sure that it's really clear what we're doing and why their contributions are valuable and really why they should take the time out. Just like anything else, it's like understanding the audience that you're speaking to and tailoring that messaging for them in order to make sure that they are going to be on board.
Yeah.
So that's some of the early expectation setting. I think that it's important the whole way through to remember that these processes might be new to them. So trying to make folks feel really comfortable, like early on in emails, telling them what to expect and walking through that. It's not the same shorthand we might be able to use with a marketing or communications team where we all know the drill. And there's just a lot that we can assume alignment on. And then the next piece is that preparation. I would say that preparation goes 2 ways. It's mandatory for us and optional for the expert.
Yeah.
On their side, right? We're going to prepare a list of questions for them. We don't ask them to complete anything in advance. Some people honestly will never look at them and just jump on the call. Others will have detailed written answers that they've prepared that you can imagine that might have a lot to do with personality, role in the organization, level of comfort with just speaking off the cuff. So a lot of different factors go into that, and we try and roll with that. From our side, the preparation is getting enough of especially if it's an area that's newer to us or a specific topic we haven't covered before, getting enough foundational knowledge in place that we can have a smart conversation. So I'll use an example here. We work with a company who has a very specific type of stem cell treatment that they've created. You may or may not know, I now know there are multiple types of stem cells that can be used, right? And so theirs is using a particular modality. in preparation for our very first conversation with them, I did not want to go in and say, tell me about the different types of stem cells. I wanted to be able to say, why is this one, which is used for this purpose, better than this one, which is used for that purpose? Tell me about the differences, pluses, minuses, and really start mining their knowledge, not the basics. That's what we do, is we look to educate ourselves so that our questions are on a little bit of a higher level, a little deeper into the details, so we can have, again, like enough of a common ground starting point to engage with that expert. Doesn't mean I won't stop and say, explain it like I'm 5, or can you break that down a little more simply for me? You definitely have to have the confidence to be able to do that in a conversation. But that preparation is so important, of just giving you enough of a knowledge base going in that you can really dig into the kind of core of what's the stuff they know that nobody else knows.
Yeah. I think that is so important, especially if they're going to block time out of their schedule to meet with you. And if you want to use them as a resource again, just making sure that first experience is really good. And it's so obvious, I feel, but there's so much you can Google and learn. Yeah. And that research part, I think, can be so helpful so that you come prepared and also have in mind where you're going to be using this content, and maybe have a bit of what's going to be your angle in this piece. If you have that knowledge beforehand, your questions can be a lot better, so you can try to shape the content as you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say we almost always know. Sometimes we'll do things that are like broader intake, and we're just trying to build the knowledge base for the organization, and then we can pull different types of content assets from there. But in many cases, we are saying like it's going to be used for this purpose first. Obviously, we hope to repurpose it and use it many times in the future. But yeah, it does allow for a deeper conversation. And I think that's the thing, like, it's not only it allows us to have better questions, but to have a better dialogue. And that really, I think, is a kind of qualitative difference between content that still can feel a bit surfacey and content that really is pulling out something, kind of some nugget or something new.
Yeah, I love that. Something you had mentioned earlier is defining who provides input versus maybe final approval. How do you go about who are these decision makers? Who's going to approve this? And so that you can actually finish some of the content.
Yeah, it's a great call out. I think this actually, ideally, this is part of the expectation setting at the beginning with our content champion, usually our partners in marketing or communications, is what is going to be the pathway to getting this published? My preference, honestly, is that if we work closely with an expert, that they are going to at least have the opportunity to provide feedback. That's very different, though, than meeting their final sign-off.
Yes.
But what we want to avoid, if possible, is the kind of bait and switch, like, oh, now I need to send this to 6 other people we didn't know about. Those people aren't briefed on what we're trying to do. And not having that context can really cause a lot of extra kind of back and forth, because they might look at it and say, this is incomplete. And maybe our intention was we're focusing on one very specific aspect. I think that happens a lot in those cases, is folks feel like we're not telling the full story. But our intention, if you think about the way a lot of content programs run, is maybe to dig into one little slice of an idea or a process. So ideally, we could set it up front. I'll be totally honest, like, the fewer people is usually better. It's just more people, more problems.
Yes.
So as many as we absolutely need to have, but not more.
Yeah.
And also considering we work in some highly regulated industries like life sciences and pharma. So if there's going to be legal and regulatory, like, we just know that's baked into the process, and understanding that. I would say on the expert side, being clear about what we're looking for from them. So again, like, if they aren't a marketing expert, then maybe we're not asking them to do big edits or something like that. It's confirming accuracy of information. Is this presented in the right light? And sometimes, depending on what we agree to within a company, we may have these more assumptive approvals. Hey, if you'd like to provide feedback, it's happening, please get it in by this date. If not, we will assume this looks good. And that respects their time. If they're like, I felt good about it, or I took a quick glance, that's fine. But also it allows the content team to actually work against a set of deadlines and move things forward and make sure things don't just get stuck in limbo.
Yeah. I love the idea of assumptive approvals. Otherwise, things can get stalled for so long. So
Yeah.
I think that is a great idea just to keep things moving early. I want to go back to something you talked about earlier, which is like the reaching out to these subject matter experts. Is that something you personally like to do as the agency, or do you usually get your content champion to spearhead that?
I would say most often the content champion feels they're in a stronger position to do that. Certainly we can be a part of those early conversations, but usually because they're in marketing or comms, like they understand the purpose well enough, and often they have the relationships where it's a little bit easier to do that initial outreach. And then from there, we tend to handle a lot, then a quick email introduction, and then we can handle scheduling and correspondence from there, of course, keeping our contacts in the loop.
Yeah, love that. So now let's assume we've gotten someone to agree to an interview. You've done your research. You've sent over your questions. What tips do you have to actually capture that content? Do you have a preferred platform, a preferred length of time that you like to interview them? What does your process look like here?
Yeah, great question. So I would say if we're talking to one expert and it's someone we've not interviewed before, we're probably going to try and grab them for an hour because there will be a little bit of get to know you and ease into the process. Certainly, if it's someone we're meeting with consistently month over month to create content, maybe we're elevating them as an individual thought leader, we might still grab them for an hour, but now we're able to batch 2, 3, maybe more kind of ideas there with pointed questions. Over time, there starts to be a nice mind meld effect, right? Where we know their stance on some things. And so we're just getting supplemental insight in other areas. So that is how we would set it up. We always record the calls. I was just saying yesterday, like I've been doing this long enough that my ability to capture somebody's exact words used to rely on my typing speed. So I am a pretty quick typer, and it used to just be like,
wow,
and like pretty much verbatim be able to transcribe in real time. We don't have to do that anymore.
That is crazy.
Yeah. So I worked as a legal assistant doing dictation. And so that's where I really honed those skills. And it was extremely valuable early on.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you could record it externally, but we didn't really have a good way and the transcript tools weren't that good. Yeah. It's much
that's
easier
impressive. Especially if you're the one doing the interview. Oh my goodness, that mind going back and forth, the typing and everything.
It was intense. I used to leave those calls feeling pretty wiped for sure.
Wow. Thank goodness for recording.
Yeah. So now we happen to use a tool called Grain. I think it's more billed as like a customer success tool, but we really love the way it records the conversations. And then on the back end for us, it's got very clean transcripts, which is nice. If you've experimented with different tools, like mileage can vary on what you're getting there. And for us, the interface is such that the video is right next to the transcript, and you can use the transcript and jump to different spots in the video. So if we've got a team member and they're like, I want to understand what they said, I'm reading the transcript, but I really need to hear them explain it, it's very easy to just jump around, and those two pieces are very closely linked. And just by the way we work, that's really helpful for us. So that, plus we still take a lot of notes, is how we're capturing the raw information. And I would say that although we prepare with questions, we always tell our SMEs, like, there's an organic component to this. Sometimes we'll get people come in and be like, that's the wrong question, or even asking it that way isn't accurate. And we're like, all right, tell us more. Or I might hear something really interesting, an offhand comment, and say, let's go back to that and dig in. And that kind of takes us on a useful, wonderful tangent that uncovers something we weren't anticipating. I like to keep it open because the point of these contributions is that these folks have things to share that aren't broadly known. Yeah. So you need to leave some room for that. You can't anticipate what every one of those things will be, or you're going to box yourself in too much.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think I like to follow the rule of you come prepared, you do your research, but then you let the conversation go where it needs to go.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, sometimes that can be frustrating because you prep so much, but sometimes it's great because you get all those good nuggets. You talked about how some of these people you're maybe interviewing don't know anything about marketing, or they might be a little camera shy or worried about how they might come across? What tips do you have for coaching them through that?
Yeah. So, as much as possible, we honestly try to make it feel like a Zoom call. And the benefit of that in the last few years, I think, is people are just much more comfortable with the virtual format, period. We let them know that we're recording a call, but our preferred way of working is to say, we're not planning. This is for internal purposes for the recording. So we would rather you speak freely here. And oftentimes we're hearing like very sensitive information about the company and things like that, but they have the confidence that that's not going to just all of a sudden get blasted out on social media without their knowledge. So I would rather have a really good comprehensive conversation than honestly try and do too many things at once. So there are certainly instances where we're able to pull clips from these conversations and we're able to use them in social with their permission, of course. But for me, if we try and think about an end kind of performative product too much in the beginning, it's going to take away from that quality of the conversation. So if I have to prioritize one, I'm going to say, don't worry about it. Don't worry about what you say. We'll work through it together. This is just a dialogue. So I wouldn't say we're informal, but I try to think about it as a dialogue truly and not a kind of rapid fire interview where they feel really put on the spot.
Yeah. If they're not comfortable with that format, that can be really overwhelming and intimidating. Mm-hmm. Starting with, I think, a conversation can be really helpful. I know I have some clients who hate seeing their face on camera. Yeah. So the only way you can get them is to let them know we're just going to use a transcript. You don't need to worry about having your face blasted all over social media. Also,
frankly, I do it myself. Like that hide your own video feature on Zoom is really, or on any platform, is really helpful. Just takes away like one level of distraction of being like, how am I looking right now? The other thing I'll say is we do have other ways of working with folks, but there definitely are plan B kind of ways. In general, the only time we would go to those, it's really more calendar constraints, not because someone's unwilling to speak to us. But for example, we can go back and forth, send the questions and get written responses. I just feel like I hate to have someone take that kind of time. But for some people, it is better because it's not perfect and they're doing that at 7 p.m. at night or something like that, when that's when they can fit this kind of contribution in. The other thing we can do is still video off the cuff speaking, but more async. So someone could just get on and record their answers to our questions. Again, I think the dialogue consistently proves to bring a higher quality of conversation. It uncovers more hidden gems, but you're always balancing what the ideal is with making sure you can actually bring this work over the finish line. We do have those kind of backups available.
Yeah, I think sometimes you got to do what you got to do. If they can't hop on an interview, you got other options to still get their expertise.
Yeah. It also depends on what we're looking for. If we're looking for a couple of quotes from someone in particular, written is going to be just fine, probably. But if someone's opinion on something or their knowledge is going to shape like the crux of a content asset, then ideally we're going to be in person, virtually in person with them.
Yes. So then once you get that content recorded, you're off to producing your content. What does this flow look like for you?
Yeah, so for us, it's really important that we have good processes for sort of knowledge transfer. So though I'm the main strategist for our clients, I'm not the main writer. So having that recording is really critical because our team does go back and watch the actual calls. I think it's really a lot of what we do in many cases is about capturing an individual's kind of voice as closely as we can. And even when it's not, there's still often a lot of vocabulary, technical terms, the way they would say something or phrase something that we want to be able to pick up on. We also provide our notes, and then we provide beyond that content brief that's really going to have the angle. So usually sometimes I'm recording a video, talking through it or writing it out about this is the conversation, it's all these questions, but we actually want to have a point of view when we're going into the piece, right? And the conversation might be more broad ranging. And maybe I say, hey, this part is so awesome, but we're not using it here. We're going to save that for later. So just giving guidance on that piece and making sure that the end product doesn't feel like a transcribed interview. That's not at all what we're going for most of the time. We're going for something that then has like a narrative behind it.
Yeah.
So being able to do that. And then internally, we use Asana, really tight project management on our side because there's already a lot of complexity. We are the last people we want to be holding up the process. And I'll tell clients, I'll say, it's not us. Like our timelines are pretty fixed. They're relatively tight. We can do quick turns if needed. I guarantee you we are not going to be your holdup. It's going to be scheduling and coordination on the front end and approvals on the back end. But everything we do goes through not only drafting, but an edit and QA process. And I'm reviewing it. Our account manager's reviewing it. So because we're the ones closest to the client, we're acting as that not only editorial check, but also the kind of, is this achieving what the client's looking for? Are we hitting the objectives we agreed on? So all that's happening before it goes out to the client. And then in the review process, I would say coming back to multiple people being involved, the most important thing we can do as much as possible is ask for a set of feedback. And this is where our content champion is really helpful, right? Everyone put in your revisions, whoever's reviewing it.
Yeah.
We're not really going to look at it until everybody's feedback is in. Mm-hmm. And then the content champion ideally goes in, and if there's, sometimes you get conflicting feedback. Sometimes people start having conversations in the comments that aren't actually about the piece of content. So they help reconcile which feedback are we including. Like sometimes it's very straightforward and there's really no work at this step, to be honest. But sometimes there is. And I always say I like to try to avoid comment wars or just these kind of like open-ended questions. And so the content champion can assist with that. We also have, for example, we have a resource on our website about how to give feedback really effectively so that it is useful for everyone and helps us not only improve that specific content asset, but over time actually get better and get closer and in more alignment. In general, if you're about to leave a comment and it's just got an ellipsis and it's just trailing off and says, I'm not sure about this, that's going to just become a conversation that probably didn't have to be. Trying to streamline the feedback process is important too. There are certainly times where I'll be honest, if it's such and such executive leader needs to see this, we're not sending them the first draft, no way, no how. We're going to work with the internal team first. Like we acknowledge that. Of course, legal and regulatory, if they're involved, are going to get that at the end of the process. So there are exceptions, but as much as possible, we want that feedback consolidated because then we can make all the changes and again, identify any points of inconsistency.
Yeah. My least favorite piece of feedback is the question marks. You mentioned that. But like when someone's asking a question, I'm like, how am I supposed to solve that one's always so confusing.
Yeah. I wonder what so-and-so would say about this. And you're like, it's an interesting thing to wonder. I don't know.
Yeah. But I love that you're using your content champion to consolidate the feedback so it's more clear for your team the revisions that need to go through.
It can be really helpful. Just even they take a quick glance at everything and say, yes, this is all in alignment.
Yeah. And then what does your process look once you've gotten approvals from the team to go ahead and distribute the content? Are you doing that yourself as an agency or do you give it to your clients? Maybe just depend on your client? What does your process look like there?
It depends. The answer is it depends. Regardless, we're probably managing the editorial calendar. So everything we're doing is working back from a set of published dates, whether or not we are the ones actually publishing. So obviously, if it's in our control, then we have more control over hitting those deadlines and make sure that we do. If we aren't the ones publishing and we're handing off to the team, then we make sure they're briefed on the editorial calendar and that everybody's in the loop on when something has been finalized. A lot of times we can actually just do that. Like we try and do it async when possible, right? With minimal communication. So for example, our editorial calendars have like a highlighting color code. And if it's green, that means it's ready to rock. And that's either a signal to our team or it's a signal to an external team. And we don't have to exchange a bunch of emails about it. We could just have this sort of universally accepted system for knowing when something's in review, and then they turn it to blue when it's been published. So finding things like that, like consistencies in process. Another example where we do that actually is in document. Yellow is our client color. So if we highlight something in yellow, it is a question for the client. If we highlight it in blue, it's usually a formatting or deployment question. So again, that could be for us, like a note for us or a note for an in-house team to take a look at, but we try and keep that really consistent. So just visually, everybody can recognize, here's what I want to pay attention to.
Yes.
We try and subtly train our clients to look out for the yellows. That's what you really need to, where you need to give your focus.
Yeah. Color coding is great if you know what the colors are.
Yeah, we're trying to keep it simple. Yeah.
Yes. I'm glad you keep it simple. Otherwise, everyone's, what does this mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Then it's just a pretty colorful document. Amazing. I covered all the questions I want to ask, but is there anything else you want to chat through? Any other tips you have for teams that are considering this?
I would say we talked about all the work involved. I say one, it is worth it. The quality of the content that can be produced by working directly with your experts is huge. The other piece of advice I would say is we talked about kind of individual buy-in, leadership buy-in for this kind of initiative is really important. They can set the tone from the top of this is important, and it's important for us as an organization, regardless of what department you're in. So please be cooperative. This is a priority.
Yeah.
I think that can really make or break. And then the last thing I'll say is all of these types of processes, like if all of this feels brand new, it's only going to serve you no matter what kind of content you're creating. So it's not, oh, this is only, we're not sure how far we want to lean into expert-led content. And it's going to help you across the board clean up some of your workflows, tighten things up. Yeah. So worth doing.
Yes. Yes, it is. I think one of the best ways to create content, we want to learn from people who know what they're doing, really have that expertise, things that you can't Google, things that you can't learn just through a simple research. That's the kind of stuff that makes for really great content. Then my favorite fun question to ask is, what is your biggest content marketing ick? So just something that really bothers you when you're seeing it out in the wild of marketing.
Oh, gosh. I would say right now, I think it's got to be just like very blatantly AI generated posts with a rocket ship emoji. Like, part of why I'm so passionate about expert-led content is I really believe that it shows a tremendous amount of respect for your buyers and your customers. And I find it interesting when companies develop these really detailed customer personas. They talk about how sophisticated their buyers are. They want to be selling to the C-suite, and then they think that it's okay to feed them slop. It doesn't align with everything else you say about your customer. And I think leaning into producing really high value content is a great way not only to show off your company's expertise, but to show that you value your customer, you value their time, and you really care about sharing with them something that will matter to them. So the opposite of that.
Yes, it's one of the quickest ways to lose trust. Just lazy content can really hurt your
Lazy
brand.
content, that's a great way to describe it. Yeah.
Where can people go to find and learn more about you?
Yeah, so our company's at everylittleword.co. That's C-O. Everylittleword.com will not take you where you want to go. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, Kristen Sweeney, Kristen E-N, Sweeney E-Y. And I also have a Substack called To the Letter, so you can subscribe there as well.
Amazing. I'll make sure to get all those links in the show notes so people can find you easily. But thank you so much for hopping on. It was great chatting through the logistics of making this expert-led content. It can be really complicated, but I think you pared it down into really simple steps for people to be able to do this on their own or work with you in order to accomplish this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Baylee. This was a great conversation. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Content Logistics. Make sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next episode. Bye!